Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's event. It's called What to Do When Bad News Goes Viral. And this is how South Daytona was prepared with the social media archive. You're going to want to stay tuned for this, folks. This is very interesting. My name's Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow here for government technology. And, guys, this is going to be a fun one. We've had a lot of great discussions, and I want to make sure that we make good use of your time over the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. We will make a recording of this presentation available to everybody within 48 hours. There's also going to be a special link in there for what are called the Golden Post Awards. That is sponsored actually by Government Technology and ArchiveSocial. So if you want to find out how your agency can become an award winner for the Golden Post Awards to be held this year in Reno, Nevada, then, folks, make sure you check the email that comes out. It's going to have that link in there. Now, this webcast is designed to be interactive, and you can participate in the Q&A. You're going to see the box down there on the bottom left-hand of the presentation panel. We love questions, so make sure you send in your questions as they come up throughout the presentation. We will get to as many as we can at the Q&A portion at the close of our webinar today. Now, the other thing you'll be able to do is if you want to download a PDF of the slides, you can do so by clicking on Webinar Resources at the bottom of the console. Now, also during today's webinar, make sure you shout out over LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Just make sure you use the hashtag GTLive to connect with everybody across that. So now at the close of the webinar, we encourage you. We love feedback. We need feedback so that we can improve. So let us know what you think. At the end of it, you'll get a link for that. But if you can't stay for the whole presentation, we'd love you to complete as much as possible. Just click on the red survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch the survey. Otherwise, it'll pop up once the webinar concludes. Now, disable any pop-up blockers you have. If you're experiencing any media player issues, we've got our crack staff on board here. So Mark from On24 will be glad to help you. If you have any technical issues, just click Help at the bottom of the console. So, folks, this is going to be fun. Joining me today to discuss this very fun topic, and we're going to see just exactly what happens when things go viral, is Jean Willard. Now, she's the Public Information Officer for South Daytona Beach Police Department. It's kind of rough to have a police department at South Daytona, yes, I know. And Anil Chawla, he's the founder and Chief Executive Officer for ArchiveSocial. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cover I'm going to go over some, like I said, the intros, general housekeeping. I'm going to do a brief part of this called Social Media by the Numbers. Then we're going to hear from Jean. We're going to hear from Anil. And then we're going to get to some Q&A. So let's get started. So let me tell you a little bit. It's all about ones and zeros, folks. Believe it or not, social media, Facebook, Twitter, all of this stuff is run by ones and zeros, and that happens to be my name, Morgan Wright. So let's talk a little bit about, and what I want to do is introduce you into South Daytona Beach there. I used to ride a motorcycle back when I was a street cop, rode the Harley-Davidson Road King 1200s. Loved the look of the Harley. You see that's the view of South Beach there. You can see how beautiful it is. You can see the cop cars there. They even just passed an ordinance to allow people to ride around on golf carts. Of course, about 3 weeks ago, being in Northern Virginia, this is what we had, so you can see why I'm so jealous, and I'd love to be down there in South Daytona Beach. So let's talk about the first thing. Let's talk about social media by the numbers. And the first thing we want to talk about is actually something that's very important, folks, and that is the First Amendment. So let's talk a little bit about the First Amendment. A lot of big issues when we start getting into the First Amendment. What can you say? What can you delete? What can you do? What are you supposed to keep? What can you get rid of? And, the public obviously has a right to speech, but there are limits to free speech. In other words, you can't yell fire in a crowded movie house. But short of that, what do you get to say on social media before you get deleted, And so we have seen a lot of things, and Anil will also talk about a lot of the legal challenges you have when you delete things or you don't have a plan for how you delete things or moderate things or get rid of things. So what we want to talk about is those things are going to be very key to this, and social media has put First Amendment issues on the forefront. Let's talk about the second thing. Actually, that kind of goes together like salt and pepper. That's why we do that. Two big things that obviously are very key to this are transparency and accountability. Part of what the Center for Digital Government does and Government Technology does is they do a survey, and they talk about the things that are important to people from a technology standpoint, for example, like body-worn cameras, why use those, other kinds of technology. Two of the top reasons we see come out all the time is transparency and accountability. In the day and age of reduced budgets, where we're being asked to do more and we're taking advantage of technology such as social media, it allows us to still maintain and still be able to provide the transparency and accountability citizens come to expect from the taxes that they pay to the public servants who serve them, the police, the fire, the emergency medical, your elected officials, the school, whatever the case is. They want to be able to say that, hey, I have a voice, and social media has done that in such a unique way. Places like Philadelphia, New York, where you actually tweet directly into a department, and they can actually respond to, like, hey, there's a pothole here. Philadelphia, I think, had a great program around that, too. You could tweet the mayor, a lot of people. So having this kind of direct access has been very unique, but that provides for the transparency and accountability a lot of folks need. Now, the third thing, and this is not the Kingston Trio, but which is who the guys are. Boy, those are some loud shirts. But think about back to the days of Sesame Street, and then you have Count. There's three things we want to talk about: 1, 2, 3. So here's what I see as a shift in what's happening out there. First thing is we talk about policies. You have to have the policies in place first. Anytime you use this stuff, think about driving a car. When we're training young kids, except me back in Kansas, we want to teach people to ride. We threw them on a John Deere riding lawnmower. Then they were qualified to drive a tractor. But short of that, before you put a 16-year-old behind the wheel of a car, what do first? You sit them in a classroom. You tell them, these are the rules of the road. These are the policies. Then the next thing we do is we train on the behavior. Here's the behavior we want. So we put them in a simulator, and we tell them, this is how you stop. This is how you turn. Use your turn signals. Check your mirrors. Left, right. Look left, look right, look left again. Only when you get that behavior, then what do? Then that's when you worry about then deploying the technology. If you don't do those things, and my opinion is if you don't do those in those order, then what you end up is you have people throwing technology at something, they don't know what to do, and that's what's going to create problems. So right before we get into it, here is our social media fail of the day. Facebook, yes, you're doing it wrong. I believe that was in Italy, and one of the members of La Cosa Nostra getting arrested, but that is definitely not how you do Facebook. So this is going to be fun. So let me introduce Jean Willard to you. Jean has served as the City of South Daytona's public information official since 2009. Her background includes work as a freelance writer and reporter, which is very important for a PIO position. She's been published in national and regional publications and magazines, which has prepared her well for this event that's coming up. In 2009, she received the National Association of Free Community Papers Best of the Best, second place award for Best Original News Story. Folks, a lot of competition in that area. In addition, she has served as VP of Public Relations for the Volusia Flagler, Florida Public Relations Association, and is currently a member of that same public information network. So, Jean, we've talked a lot. I've seen a lot of this presentation. I can't wait for you to give it, so let me turn the floor over. The floor is yours, Jean.
Well, thank you, Morgan, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share South Daytona's social media experience during what has become known as the duct tape dog incident. As a public information officer for the city, I've attended numerous trainings for disaster preparedness. This is Florida, after all, and hurricanes and floods are what we do. I was ready for that, but this was different. So this presentation is really about sharing lessons learned. We use our city Facebook primarily to remind residents about events and activities, the fun stuff. I laugh now, but before this incident, I was just trying to get to 500 likes for our city. So our presence was very low-key. And for a long time, we had no formal social media archiving. Taking screenshots of the postings is very time-consuming and certainly not very efficient. So I was happy when we started using ArchiveSocial last year, especially since at the height of this incident, we had received nearly 24,000 comments. You don't want to be archiving that manually. Anyway, I thought I had social media covered, but I had no idea what was about to hit the day after Thanksgiving. First, let me mention that I was on vacation with my family in North Georgia, and as was unusual for me, I hadn't even checked my email or the city's social media accounts since the day before Thanksgiving. I went to bed Friday night and was awakened by a call from our police chief, Ron Wright. And as I'm sure you can all imagine, getting a call from the chief of police in the middle of the night is usually not good news. Chief Wright said we had a situation and asked me to get on Facebook and see what could be done. Let me show you this first slide because this is what I saw. Oops.
And, Jean, actually, that was my mistake. Let me just interrupt briefly for 1 second. We have a poll here real quick, and let me turn it right back over to you. Guys, my mistake. I was so excited to get to it, I forgot to do my job real quick. Let's do this quick poll because then we're going to turn that back over to Gene's slide. Real quickly, folks, what's your opinion on social media as a public record? So first thing is, do you think it's definitely a public record by law? Second of all, it might be a record, but our activity is not worth retaining. Third, you feel strongly that it's not a public record. Or fourth, I just don't know. And apparently I don't know because I blew this whole poll thing, so I'm in the fourth category. So maybe it's like, what was his name, Steve Harvey, that blew the Miss America thing? My fault. Let's take a look at that. Everybody thinks it's definitely a public record. A few of you think it might be a record not worth retaining. Some of you feel it's not a public record. And like me, I'm in the 9.4%. I don't know. So, Gene, I blew this presentation for you. I hope you can recover okay because I tell you got some great stuff. So let me turn it back over to you now. And it is South Daytona, not South Daytona Beach. I blew that too. So back to you, Gene.
Oh, that's not a problem. Let me show you what I found when I got on Facebook. I was pretty astonished, but a woman named Katy Brown had decided to duct tape her dog's muzzle shut, as you can see. Then, if you can believe it, she actually posted this photo and wrote, "This is what happens when you don't shut up." She went on to double and then triple down on her actions with subsequent comments. As you can see, she kept trying to defend what she did. Unfortunately for us, she showed her location as South Daytona. The only way I can describe the reaction is that this photo ignited a firestorm. People were outraged and demanded the South Daytona Police Department take action. The posts just started rolling in and they never stopped. And this is a look at what was coming in on our Facebook page. And in addition to this, there were already hundreds of private messages on Facebook. So, of course, the first thing I did was post an update, reassuring everyone that we were aware of the incident and we'd opened an investigation. I really tried my best that night to answer every private message. I kept wishing there was a way to send a group response to all those messages. The next morning, Saturday morning, the postings had just exploded. This incident had truly gone viral, and the people were extremely passionate with their opinions. In the meantime, back home, the police department was receiving hundreds of phone calls, and the city was receiving thousands of emails. But being 500 miles away, I just focused on our Facebook and a little bit on the Twitter account and kept in touch with the police department. On the second day, there were so many messages, there was no way I could answer them all. The best I could do was scan through them and try to reply to any that I thought, might do us harm and deal with rumors. As you know, people tend to believe what they read on the Internet. So I tried to deal with false information and squelch rumors. It was a little like playing whack-a-mole. But social media does allow you to have a two-way conversation. At one point, I had to ask people to please not call the police department because these calls were rolling over to dispatch and tying up those lines. Now, the police soon discovered that this woman's real name was Catherine Lemansky and that she did own property in our city, but she wasn't living there. Later that day, I could literally feel the tone of the postings begin to change. There was like an energy shift. The remarks went from, "Hey, do you guys know about this?" to "This woman is horrible and needs to be arrested," or worse, to "Why aren't the police doing their job?" So that's a little disconcerting. This is 24 hours later, and people are questioning why the police can't track down a woman and a dog, who we know had obviously gone underground and didn't want to be found. So I had to work those comments hard on Facebook. And with all the information on the Internet, everyone is a private investigator. People started posting Lemansky's address. Someone posted photos of her truck and tag, family members' names, and other private information, basically saying that, why couldn't the police find her because we have all this information. And of course, our police department, they had a lot of that same information, some of which was not credible or current. And you may have heard the Facebook posters police themselves. Fortunately, many did just that. When someone made a particularly critical comment regarding the police, others jumped in and defended the city's efforts. One guy even messaged me later and apologized for his comments. And it wasn't until after the event that I realized that some county and local police officers had posted comments in support. Meanwhile, while the police continued to work this case, the media coverage exploded. So this will show you who it was picked up by. It was local, national, international, including ABC Worldwide News, NBC, the New York Times, the Today Show, BBC. I mean, just everybody latched on to this. And the media used our Facebook page as a source for official city quotes and photos. I can tell you that nothing gives you pause like seeing your posting plastered all over the Today Show. My first thoughts were, oh my gosh, did I spell everything correctly? How does that sound? Did I write that? So I guess it's really no different than a media release or an interview. Your words will be used, even if they're attributed to a nameless city official. Now, we also had what I call the jokers. And these were people who posed as Katy Brown. One of them posted a dog's picture and listed the lab on Craigslist, and that got everyone very excited. Another posted a doctored photo that showed Katy Brown with her mouth taped shut. So some people actually had a sense of humor about this. By Saturday night, the investigation had led our police to Avon, Connecticut. We shared the information with that department, but they said, nope, she wasn't in their city. We got a little bit of flack for that. People thought we were dumping the investigation on Connecticut and washing our hands of it, but our investigators continued to work this case. One of the other things that the police department asked me to do was to send them tips that were coming in. So this is another issue that made me realize that one person may not be enough to handle social media in a crisis. On Monday, our investigators tracked this lady down to Cary, North Carolina, and spoke to her over the phone. They contacted local police who interviewed her and charged her with cruelty to animals. So I really have to give credit to the South Daytona Police Department for their persistence in this case, even though it didn't even occur in our jurisdiction. In the end, the reactions really turned around. As you can see, these are just two of the many, many comments I got, people thanking us for our efforts and for following up and for communicating with them during this crisis. Let me also give you an idea of the stats that I got off Facebook. So you can see that we reached 1.7 million people. I mean, that's pretty astounding for a city of our size. Hundreds and thousands of emails and comments. So this kind of tells you that the power of social media is staggering. So let me just kind of go over some of the lessons we learned. First of all, don't think it can't happen to you. I was ready for a hurricane, a storm, a flood. What I got was a dog. So it could be anything. An employee caught on video, a tainted product, a scandal involving an elected official. You just don't know what's going to go viral, and people will find their way to your social media. Number two, I think it's important to incorporate a crisis media plan into your disaster plan. It's not just about managing the disaster. It's about how you're perceived and how you communicate. Number three, just make sure that you have someone that can handle social media on a full-time basis during an event and determine if they're going to need help. Who's the backup? What if they had not been able to contact me that weekend? And do others have passwords and usernames? Be sure to post frequent updates. Even though I did try to post frequently, I think in retrospect, I could have posted even more frequently. Number five, and I think probably this is the most important lesson I learned, is to know your audience. This is key, and it's a balancing act. You have to validate what you're hearing without going too far. Don't speculate, be empathetic, show concern. I had to find language to show we appreciated the gravity of the situation without actually convicting this woman ahead of time. I'd like to end by reading a quote. This was from a local news columnist who I think summed this incident up better than anyone I had heard. This is Mark Lane from the Daytona Beach News Journal, and he writes, "This is a confluence of events that could not have happened on anything near this scale only 5 years ago. But in our new age of Internet-enabled instant shaming, we really are a global village, with villagers poised to haul malefactors to the pillory in the town square. And you can never know which call center this might descend upon." Well, thank you for allowing me to share this. I'm happy to take any questions. And Morgan, it's back to you.
Hey, thanks again. And first of all, Gene, it's South Beach, folks. Sorry again for barging in, but folks, I'm going to push one back slide. I've just got to do this. You guys need to take a look at this. Just look at the impact. We already had somebody, I think it was Katy Walk, said she remembers this post. I said, wait till you see the stats. Folks, look at this, 1.7 million people. That's amazing. I'm not quite sure how you did it, but that was great work, Gene. So thanks. And guys, stick around. Get us your Q&A. Get us your questions in. We want to make sure that we can get these answered to you. Now, I'm going to do this in the right order this time. I'm going to introduce Anil. I'm going to read the poll questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to him, and I'm going to let him tell you where in North Carolina ArchiveSocial is also located. So first of all, Anil Chawla is the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. They're a civic tech company that specializes in archiving social media for public records requirements. As you can see, with 1.7 million Facebook impressions, huge. ArchiveSocial now partnered with the state of North Carolina in 2010 to launch the world's first open and interactive archive of social media. Now, since then, ArchiveSocial has worked with hundreds of government entities such as San Francisco, Austin, and folks, the U.S. Department of Justice to ensure long-term transparency. Remember that word? Transparency for government social media communications. Now, the company was selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013. 2014, Gartner recognized them as a cool vendor. And again, folks, when you get your email, make sure that you go to that link. Make sure you take a look at the awards, the Golden Post Awards that they're going to award. If you're eligible, make sure you apply because Government Technology and ArchiveSocial are sponsoring this. So let me go to the last poll question here real quick. Now, we know how many of you think it's a public record. Now let's talk about how many of you are retaining, or how do you currently retain your records. So do you retain records? Do you not retain records and rely on the networks like the Twitter, the Facebook to do that for you? Do you take manual captures, screenshots, copy and paste? Do you use a personal backup tool like Backupify, Social Safe, something like that? Do you use an automated solution for archiving? Or the fifth one, are you already a happy ArchiveSocial customer? So let's see what the answers to those were. Well, I'll tell you what, 50%, Anil, over 50% are not retaining their records or relying on the network, I should say. And, folks, you can see that 12% manual screenshots, 3% personal backup, 3% automated, but 30% already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. You got a lot of fans on here, Anil. And, by the way, where is ArchiveSocial located in North Carolina?
Morgan, I do appreciate that setup. ArchiveSocial is located in Durham, North Carolina, but I do happen to personally live in Cary, North Carolina, where the suspect was apprehended. So that is another connection here in the case. It's a small world, and social media makes that world even smaller. But I do appreciate the introduction there, Morgan, and I appreciate the amazing audience that we have here today. Thank you to the 30% of those folks who are already ArchiveSocial customers for tuning in. Because you're here, as I am, to hear Jeannie's story, which I think is extraordinarily compelling. If you look at South Daytona's social media presence, it's a modest social media presence given the size of the town. But when this incident happened, like Jeannie said, it was a firestorm. And we're going to take a look at some of that data and show that to you. And I think it's incredibly compelling to hear how South Daytona navigated that roller coaster of citizen emotion around the case. The social media played a critical role in bringing the citizenry back into South Daytona's court on the case, showing that they were responding, played a critical role in ensuring that the police department wasn't overwhelmed with all the outreach and concern from the citizens as they were trying to track down the suspect and ensure closure on the case. So while we saw social media blow up and become potentially a giant problem for the city, its benefits shined through, and South Daytona and Jeannie did all the right things. So thank you for sharing your story on that. They'll help agencies here in the future who someday might experience the same kind of situation. Now, what I'm here to do is to talk about this other side. This was the event that was happening, and at the time, of course, chaos, just trying to manage it. But as Jeannie mentioned, later on, this became a national, or at the time and even afterwards, a national news story. Some of the folks here have already commented on seeing this story in the national news. The Facebook posts showing up in major publications and news outlets. And so the content on social media really matters. And I'm here to talk to you about that content and record keeping and the critical importance to have records to archive to protect your agency. As we found out from South Daytona, that the journalist population did utilize that social media content in their reporting. I'm going to focus on some other real-life examples. This is, of course, a great example. I'm going to fill in a few more so you can understand how social media is finding its way into various situations, why that does create a critical need to archive social media. With time permitting, I do want to actually show you South Daytona's archive as you get a sense of the data and the spike that happened there in November and December of last year. And, of course, we're here to answer your questions, so please use that Q&A window. Now, before I jump right in, I actually have a little treat here for this audience. We go around the country doing this kind of presentation, but I have a tidbit of data that's brand new based off of a study that ArchiveSocial just conducted in the month of January here in 2016. And what we're interested in understanding is a lot of agencies today are relying on Facebook and Twitter. About 50% of you today, we have a lot of ArchiveSocial customers, which is great. But generally speaking, about 70 to 80% of agencies are relying on Facebook and Twitter. We wanted to see how much of that data is staying there and how much is being deleted. So we ran a study across our customer base. We sampled 400 customers that have a Facebook presence for the month of January alone and found that nearly 8,000 records were deleted from Facebook out of that population of 400 customers. About 20 a customer in that month deleted from Facebook without any kind of record keeping or archiving. That content is gone forever. There's no way to access it. Facebook can't provide it to you. So really eye-opening. And in fact, if you narrow it down, out of the 400, actually only 281 of those customers were affected. So those 281 customers, about 70% of that population, experienced at least one deletion, and that 281 customers, they each experienced about 30 deletions in the month of January alone. So again, that sets the context for what I'm about to talk about and the importance of social media as a record. This is happening, and it was pretty eye-opening for us to see the amount of deletion that's happening without folks really being, there's no way to be notified about it on your own if you're just a Facebook user. So very interesting. Now, as government agencies, a critical concern for all of us is the issue of public records. I'm going to give you the example out of Florida. Social media is, without doubt, a public record in the United States. This has been an emerging topic over the last several years. I know a small percentage of you had some concerns about social media being a record or weren't sure when we did the poll at the beginning of this webinar. And what you need to look for in your state is the language of that records law. The vast majority of states actually share a lot of language here. A key phrase is that content, communications should be treated as public record regardless of the physical form. And so that language has been in the public records laws for most states in the United States for several decades. And it's the kind of language that basically says it's not the format, not the physical delivery of the content, but it's the content itself that really matters. In other words, a crime tip is a crime tip, whether it comes over an email, on a piece of paper, or on a Twitter direct message. It is a crime tip and should be retained in the manner that all crime tips are retained. Now, states like Florida, as we'll see here on the next slide, have come out with additional guidance interpreting that law to say, yes, social media can constitute public record, and in fact, if it does, it is your obligation to follow the retention schedule, to have your own record keeping for it. And so we've seen that here in Florida come out of the Attorney General's office. We've also seen that in several states. Most of the states across the country have issued some kind of guidance around this issue. And so we can provide resources on that if you're not in Florida. But it's something that we need to acknowledge that by the law, social media is certainly a public record. Now, it can be a record, sure, academically, but what about in reality? What are we doing on social media today to formulate actual public records? Well, South Daytona is a perfect example. In the midst of this controversy, this firestorm, social media is being used to communicate extraordinarily rapidly, trying to quell the criticism and the anger and ensure that people understand what the police department was doing to resolve the issue. So a lot of communication was certainly going back and forth in that incident. And we see that happen all the time in any kind of public safety and emergency response situation as well. So I have a couple examples here. Day-to-day law enforcement uses social media to get information out about crime tips, get information about crimes in order to solicit crime tips. And then, of course, there are disasters like the Boston Marathon bombings, where a lot of developments are happening very quickly, and social media is at the forefront of getting that information out. So regardless of the scale of your disaster or emergency, if you're in an emergency, it's very likely that social media will be a place, a forum, where you need to get information out quickly. It's not being put anywhere else. It's on your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed. It is information relating to the business of your agency. Regardless of physical form, it must be retained. So we see that a lot. One example, just again close to home, we already talked about ArchiveSocial being in Durham, North Carolina. Well, it turns out a few months ago, 911 went down in the city of Durham. And so City of Durham's a customer of ours as well. They decided to get the information out over social media to say 911's down, but here's how you can reach us. And so this has happened. Social media, again, is an avenue for getting information out, and certainly will create records. Now, outside of emergencies and crimes and stories going viral, every agency on social media partakes in some kind of service to the citizens. That's ultimately what public agencies exist to do, is to serve the citizens. And so it's important to look at your content. If today you're not sure that you're creating records, just go through your Facebook feeds and look at the kinds of questions that are being asked from citizens, the kind of clarifications you're making, the responses you're providing, which is a service to citizens. It may be providing information that's not provided as clearly elsewhere. It may be new information. And certainly in the course of these day-to-day interactions, some records will be created and must be retained. Now you may ask, okay, well, our social media is creating these records. It's out there on Twitter and Facebook. I've already showed you at the very beginning of this that data is slowly disappearing. It's called information decay, and it's disappearing whether you know about it or not. But maybe most of it's still up there. Who's asking for it? Well, actually almost 2 years ago now, the Seattle PD received this really interesting tweet where a citizen was following the police department's feeds in Seattle, noticed that the feeds that were supposed to be sharing all of the local crimes seemed to be out of date or missing information. So he actually tweeted to the Seattle PD on Twitter, and a few tweets in said, I want the archives of all those Twitter feeds, and please consider this a Public Records Act request. So basically, the citizen made a public records request for social media using social media, which is certainly a sign of the times, and really wanted to understand, if I'm a citizen relying on these Twitter feeds from Seattle PD, can I rely on them? Did I miss something? Did they delete something? So he wanted Seattle PD to provide their archives. And they said, sure, we need to do that. You need to go fill out a public records request on our website, not over Twitter. But we will respond to this, but give us 3 weeks. So certainly acknowledged as a valid public records request. Now, you personally in your agency may not have seen a request for Twitter feeds or Facebook content specifically, and you might not see that for some time. But what we've found talking to agencies across the country is that many of the public records requests you receive do, in fact, encapsulate your social media content. So if you see a request around any and all documents, all notifications of the street closure, again, during an emergency storm, for example, you might tweet out a street closure notification, all emails and communications. If you think about that language, if the rest of that records request is tightly scoped to a certain topic or incident, then it is your obligation to produce any social networking content in relation to that request. And so many of the agencies we work with have recognized this and are now doing so. So something to think about there. So hopefully I've made a case to those of you who are on the fence or unsure about social media as a record that there is compounding evidence that social media is a record. And in fact, if you go back and look at your social media presence and you do have some two-way dialogue going and you do have an active presence, it's likely that records are being generated. I want to switch gears and just talk about some of the legal outcomes and how record keeping can protect your agency or come into play. The first one's a national news story that came out in 2012. It was the first lawsuit of its kind. It relates directly to the First Amendment concerns that Morgan brought out at the beginning of this presentation. And basically what happened here is that citizens were posting on the Honolulu PD Facebook page, and they were posting their belief on a controversial issue, which is gun control. And they ultimately, the police department decided to remove some of those postings, and the citizens saw that happen, and then they complained that we have a First Amendment right to express our opinions. You're not allowed to remove our postings. This is a government forum, public forum, and they filed a lawsuit. Now, this lawsuit was never ruled upon one way or another. The city ended up settling the case by agreeing to pay $31,000 in attorney's fees, and they also opened up their social media policy, which, again, your jurisdiction has to evaluate this. Your attorney has to guide you. What we've seen as a best practice is to maintain a social media policy that allows you to moderate, but be very crystal clear on that policy and be very crystal clear on how you enforce it. You don't necessarily have to go the way that Honolulu did, which is just open up their policy and allow anything to fly. But the critical point I want to make here is that when you go to court for removing content, how do you tell your side of the story if you haven't kept records? What you really want to do is have the records of what was posted, show your policy and how that matched up, and say, this posting fell under this clause in our moderation policy, and that's why we moderated it. And so something to think about, because every agency that we talk to is dealing at some point with having to moderate profane, offensive, or inappropriate content. Now, some other stories that you haven't heard about in the news, but we've experienced out of our own customer base. This one comes out of South Florida as well. In this case, what happened was the police department had learned about a local company potentially operating as a scam. They had it from a reliable source. So they went ahead and put the information out on their Facebook feed. But as you might imagine, the company didn't quite agree with the label of scam. So the company complained. The police department then removed the postings per the company's complaint. And then the company came back shortly thereafter and actually said, we're looking at filing a lawsuit, so here's a pre-discovery request. And in that discovery request, we're going to ask you for every time you communicated that we were a scam, and that would include the postings that we already asked you to remove. So, if that lawsuit were to move forward, that's a discovery request that the Florida Police Department this police department has to fulfill under records laws. They had to have a record, but they were already asked to remove that content. Fortunately, they were archiving, and so you at least prevent yourself from starting a legal case on the wrong foot. Across the country in California, we had a situation where the police department, again, just doing their job, trying to protect the public. And in this case, this was just doing their job in accordance with what the city had had opted to do, which is to coordinate a gun buyback program. Again, very controversial issue. There's a lot of controversy on their Facebook page. Shortly after coordinating this gun buyback program, the NRA actually came and issued a public information request related to the buyback program and wanted all the communications. And it was a mess on Facebook. But fortunately, what happened was our team had reached this police department, the Santa Barbara PD, about 3 weeks prior to this request, convinced them to start a free trial. And so in that free trial, they had all the record keeping they needed to be able to respond to the NRA, and that never became anything else. So they were able to fulfill the records request and move on. And that's exactly what you want to be able to do. And finally, I actually see our friend and colleague from San Marcos here, so I want to make a shout out to San Marcos for the amazing job that they do on social media. Unfortunately, last year, San Marcos, like many other cities in Texas, had to deal with some flooding 2 times, actually, both around Memorial Day and, again, close to Halloween. And social media played a huge role in informing the public, ensuring citizen safety during these disasters. And after each flood, the team was actually able to use the archive to come back and not only analyze what had happened, but also respond to any kind of records requests. And we do have a case study for that as well, published by Government Technology. So these are 3 different situations in addition to the story that we've heard from South Daytona, how record keeping can protect you. So how do you get started with record keeping? What I want to do is give you a variety of options here. And again, based on your own situation, you can opt for what's best for your agency. With some guidance to get started, as we talked about in the beginning, information is being lost from Facebook as we speak. It's being deleted. Things change online, and there is no record-keeping guarantee from sites like Facebook and Twitter. You cannot rely on Facebook and Twitter for your record-keeping. You cannot rely on them to meet your public records obligations. In fact, in many states, the guidance that's come out has stated that it is the agency's obligation to actually take that data off the network and have your own record, and you cannot rely on the network. What's the simplest thing you can do? Take screenshots. Well, it sounds painful, and it is. It's something that you should do as a stopgap. It's much better than not having any record whatsoever, especially if you are going to remove or moderate content, or there's just a sticky situation. You don't have any archiving technology in place. At least manually archive with a screenshot. Positive is that it doesn't cost you anything, but it is not necessarily a long-term strategy. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but one of the issues there is that when you take a screenshot of some content, you're not actually getting the full electronic record. Great example here is with Twitter. We all know that a tweet is no more than 140 characters, but if you look at the actual electronic record, which consists of technical metadata along with that content, the entire electronic record is more than 2,000 characters of metadata. This is information that's embedded in the tweet about the user IDs that belong to the users who posted the content, potentially the location of where it was posted from, potentially which Twitter client was used. All the information that's about this content is embedded in that tweet, and there is actually case law about that metadata being a part of the public record. So taking a screenshot gets you the 140 characters. It doesn't get you the other 2,000, so it's not a complete record. but it is better than nothing. The reason why I say that this is just a stopgap is that over time, it will consume a tremendous amount of resources to do this comprehensively. Now, the customers of ours that now have automated technology have told us that they were spending up to 20 to 30 hours a month taking screenshots of their social media to comply with the records laws. And when you're doing that, you're creating lots of screenshots. It's really difficult to organize and manage. And then say 2 or 3 years from now you have to actually search that content. How do you search a screenshot? Very, very hard to do, if not impossible. And then finally, because just a screenshot doesn't have the metadata, anyone can Photoshop anything. It's a poor record. It can be easily disputed. It may not even protect your agency when needed. So again, lots of reasons not to treat this as a long-term strategy, but again, better than nothing. So consider this for your agency if you're not able to move on some kind of record-keeping technology today. Now, if you are able to move on some kind of technology to do this for you, the lowest cost place to start is with a personal backup tool. These are tools like Backupify or Social Safe, very basic tools that were created for consumers to have some copy of their own social media. Early on, 2008, 2009, when social media was really taking off, government agencies were turning to these tools because there weren't really no alternatives in the archiving space. The thing to know about backup tools is while they will automate the process for you, backup is very, very different than archiving. Archiving is all about having records that you can piece together to make sense of the content, that you can use in a legal context, ultimately that can protect you for records requests or legal situations. Backup is just about having a copy of the data. They do go hand in hand, but backups tend to be a lot simpler, especially with these low-cost tools. It's not as comprehensive. There's not very much tooling around searching, so it's very hard to find what you're looking for. Maybe really hard to make sense of the record. In fact, if I go back a slide, what we're looking at there is a Facebook feed from one of those products, and you really can't piece together the comments and status updates to make the conversation make sense anymore. The backup tools are very, very simple, but low cost, so it's up to you to weigh those trade-offs, and again, it's a great place to get started. Now, what I strongly recommend, and ultimately what every agency needs, just like you archive your email, you need an archiving solution for social media. There are many vendors out there. I want to talk about a class of vendors that's an important class to consider, but there are some considerations. And that class is a class of vendors that do all-in-one archiving. So typically these vendors come from an email archiving background or a website archiving background, and then they've multi-purposed that archive to be able to store social media and perhaps other types of content. Positive here is, one, is archiving. Archiving allows you to have that records management capability, so it's really important. And it can be convenient from a procurement standpoint to work with one vendor. Ultimately, what you have to look for, regardless of which vendor you choose, you have to look for, can you actually have the records that you need? There should be no data conversion, no data loss, because the moment a vendor does that to you, they're putting you at risk. In fact, currently, one of the major vendors in this space has a massive lawsuit against them from their customers for converting some data in the archive and then that customer getting in trouble. You cannot accept data conversion when it comes to archiving. So some of those vendors, early on at least, were converting social media into email or some other format. Hopefully they've moved away from that. The other problem there is when you are in a product that is designed for email or instant messaging, it may not be robust enough to really deal with social media content in a way that makes sense. It may not be able to piece together those conversations, allow you to search Facebook content that happened 3 years ago and had hundreds of comments on it, or recreate a Twitter timeline. And so it may be very, very difficult to reconstruct that social media. So something to look for. Again, ultimately, there are different trade-offs with all of these approaches. And sometimes when you have that social media content, you really want to be able to get it out in a format like a PDF where you can make sense of it. And it's much richer content than email, so you have to look at how do you get it out and work with it. And that's really what takes me to these 4 criteria. Ultimately, when you are looking to solve this problem, long-term, I strongly encourage you to look for some kind of archiving solution, again, just like your email. But here's the 4 criteria that are really unique to social media that I encourage you to consider. One is frequency. This data sits out there on Twitter and Facebook. Unlike email, it's not housed by your IT. You have to go out and get it. The longer you take to get it, more likelihood of data loss, as we saw, again, with the content that was lost from Facebook earlier. So you want to get that content as frequently as possible. You want to be comprehensive. You want both sides of the conversation. You want the metadata. You want these records to be authentic. I talked about how screenshots can be photoshopped. Well, ultimately, if it's not authentic and it can't be proven to be authentic, it may not be able to serve as legal evidence. So what does your archiving solution do to ensure that those records, those Facebook posts, comments, those tweets can actually serve as legal evidence if needed? And then the context piece is huge. It's perhaps the most overlooked attribute by vendors in our space. But ultimately, archiving vendors shouldn't be there to store data for you. They're there for you to be able to produce the information when you need it. So can you recreate that Facebook conversation from 3 years ago? Can you replay that Twitter feed? Can you make sense of your content? Pull it out of the archive and easily hand it off to somebody without getting bogged down. That's ultimately true social media archiving. And to give you an example of what all that looks like, I'm actually going to load up a demonstration here. One last slide, I'm not sure that this slide actually showed up here in this console. It's showing up blank for me. But archives on social media also have shown some unique benefits for communications teams. It's not just about the legal. If you're on the communications side, having an archive of your social media may allow you to then analyze the sentiment of your citizens to understand when it's been positive or negative. You can do some kind of alerting on the content to be aware of incidents more rapidly. Certainly technology like this makes a lot of sense in the situation that South Daytona has experienced. And that's something that you can look for in an archiving solution, is to have that value add of being able to help the communications team in addition to meeting a legal requirement. So with that, I've got my contact information on the screen. I do want to do a quick 2-minute demonstration. I know we've got some questions to answer, but I want to show you what an archive looks like. And most fitting, it seems that we should show you the South Daytona archive. And so all of you should be seeing my screen now. I am logged into South Daytona's archive. I mentioned earlier that they have a modest amount of social media activity and then a big spike in November with the duct tape dog incident. You can see that spike right here in terms of what happened. And I'm going to fast forward to go straight to a search interface and actually kind of recreate an interaction that might happen around trying to find content in this situation. And so if you bear with me for 1 second, it looks like we hit a little timeout. I'll get us back in the archive. And I'm actually going to show you the search to be able to go find this content very rapidly and talk about those 4 factors. So while that incident is happening, archiving technology today actually exists to capture content from Facebook in real time. And so that's exactly what was happening with this archive. And so that tackles the frequency characteristic that I brought up. Now, ultimately, you want to go back and find that content, make sense of it. Look for tooling that allows you to do that, being able to search within a date range, being able to isolate the type of content you're looking for. Maybe you're just looking for private messaging or photos or reviews. You maybe want to narrow down on specific accounts in your archive. You may even want to narrow down on specific search criteria, such as who sent the post, who received it, stuff like that. In this case, because of that giant spike, it's really easy. We're just going to do a wildcard search here, and I'm going to show you how we can drill down and find exactly the content relevant to this situation. And so when this search loads up, you'll see that we have more than 20,000 records from the city of South Daytona. In this search interface, again, we're looking at the whole archive. You can actually drill down to what you're looking for, find that needle in the haystack. You'll see that the bulk of activity happened in November of 2015. Nearly 14,000 records that results here that we can look at. And of course, there was much more in December as well. But we can narrow down to November. And in fact, we can even narrow down to, let's go look at the comments that showed up on the Facebook timeline and be able to find exactly what we're looking for. And through here, you can kind of scroll through. Again, we could have done a search for dog or some kind of specific incidents. But here we have a comment about she's been arrested. And you can actually replay that conversation thread. So that's that context piece, bringing it all back together, being able to expand on all the comments on this post with all, here's the image of the dog that was embedded in a citizen's comment, having that full robust picture just like you would see it on Facebook, but it's out of a legal archive. You can even pull up the metadata, which is here in the left corner for that record, and have all that electronic information that may be useful in court. And ultimately, you can go over to the left here, click on export, and turn this to a PDF and send it to somebody. It's that easy to sort through that level of volume, find what you're looking for, and get it out. That's what this technology exists to do. So as you look at archiving technology, I strongly encourage you to look at these 4 different factors and see how it could help you in a situation like this. And Morgan, that's all I've got, so back to you.
Hey, if you guys could see, this was just terrific. And I tell you, we're going to get right into the questions. This is probably the most questions we've received in such a long time. Real quick answer for everybody. Tina, especially City of Manassas, yeah, you guys you'll get a copy of the slides, but if you can't wait for the slides, go to the webinar resources down at the bottom. You can download the slides. And hey guys, look, everybody's going to get a link today. You'll get a link to the Golden Post Awards that's going to be held. March 1st is the deadline. Make sure you get in. We will send you a copy of these slides, so no fear anybody or everybody will get this to you. Hey, let's dive right in. And I'll tell you right now, Gene, one of the biggest questions we got is about your social media, your crisis media plan. Is that something that you have that can be shared with folks? What are your, and if so, where would they find it? And if not, how would they go about building one?
Well, it is a good question. I'm still working on ours and fine-tuning it since the incident. However, if I get something completed, I'd be happy to share it.
So we'll make a note of that, folks, and then we'll get with our crack staff here at Government Technology, and we'll see what we can do. But as you guys saw, I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. Also, we have a couple other questions here, too, and this is going to be for both Anil and Gene. So, Gene, for one thing, did you guys, we have a question here from Todd D'Angelo, City of Parkland. He said, did you consider disabling the Facebook feature that permits people to post comments on your page? And then, Anil, you can talk about the impacts if you do stuff like that. But, Gene, what did you guys do when you were starting to get 1.7 million hits?
Oh, I never considered that. You know, the good and bad about Facebook is that this interaction, and I felt we were much better off just addressing the problem and being as open and transparent as we can be.
And Anil, what are the impacts? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that Gene answered that. Early on with Facebook, again, 2008, 2009, a lot of cities were taking that approach because of concerns about risk and record keeping. How do we just turn off that two-way engagement? Ultimately, social networking exists, and the reason why your agency should even be there is for that two-way dialogue. And there are ways to then account for the risk, as we've talked about. One key thing to know is that you cannot disable comments on Facebook. You can disable citizens creating brand new posts on your timeline, but the moment you post something, there is no longer a way to disable comments, and the comments have to come in. That's something that Facebook actually took away a few years ago. And so by joining Facebook, that is a commitment at that point in having that two-way conversation, and Facebook doesn't allow you out of that.
Yeah, and as you guys saw, yeah, the minute you put it out there, lots and lots of comments, obviously, and great thing that they had this. Here's another question. It comes from Nathan Mueller, City of Novi. So how do you determine, Gene, what information to share on Facebook without sharing too much? What kind of process did you go through? Who did you end up talking to? Because obviously you had to respond, but you didn't want to tell too much, but you kind of had to get a lot of these, quote, haters off your back. People thought that you weren't doing anything.
Yeah, that's correct. You know, it's interesting. Some cities have a process where you have to have your post vetted or approved before they can be posted. I happen to have a great relationship with the police department, and they let me use my discretion. And I've worked with them long enough that I know what I can put out and what I can't put out. But I didn't, first of all, try to promise them anything we couldn't deliver. I would give them the basic information that the lieutenant or captain said we could share, and just tried to keep reassuring him, you know, hey, we're on it, we're working on it, we consider this to be a serious incident, those type of comments.
Great. And here's one for both of you, because this will get into the technology side as well as the policy development side. We've got a question here from David Marino, which actually, by the way, he's the PIO in Buda, Texas, so we're getting folks from all over the place. David, congrats. He's the new PIO with the city down there. Started a little over a week ago, so trial by fire. Welcome. He's the first PIO the city has ever had. So what should he do first in implementing a social media plan? Because I know there's policy and approaches, and then Anil also, when a city comes on board, what are some of the considerations? So let's go to you first, Gene.
Well, congratulations on your job. And when I started with the city nearly 7 years ago, I was their first PIO also. Basically, I took out the disaster plan and I started a new chapter and entitled it Public Communications. And then just went down through a checklist of issues like, you know, who is going to be responsible for communications during an incident. I believe a centralized command and control of information is very important. But if it's a police department issue, it may be handled differently than the fire or perhaps the city. And then because I love checklists, I just went down and started my checklist. How are you going to notify your department heads? After this incident, we started an emergency code red text messaging. Is your city manager notified? How about the city council? What's your time frame going to be for media and public updates? Do you have links to your other Facebook accounts and to your website? Are you coordinating those messages? Where are you going to steer the public to? What's your primary source of information going to be? In this case, it was our Facebook because that's where everyone went. You need to assign an employee to monitor your Facebook. Who's your backup? All media releases should contain links to, say, your Facebook and your website. And think ahead. What kind of resources are you going to need? Are you going to have to bring in somebody to answer the phones? So basically, I just went through a checklist like that to set up our policy. And we also, in Volusia Flagler, have access to a public information network where if we need additional resources in, say, a real emergency, we can pull them in. So that information is in there also. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and Neil, over to you. Your considerations. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. A gentleman mentioned that he's a new PIO where there was never a PIO before, and so actually stepping back, I'm not sure if the question was also about social media strategy and approach in general. You absolutely just need a social media policy that addresses some critical concerns such as professional versus personal usage. The First Amendment concern, you do need a comment moderation policy that details when and how you will address content that fits under certain criteria, whether it's profane or off-topic. You do need to talk about the record keeping and how you're approaching that. So establishing that policy doesn't need to be a long-winded thing because this has been done many times over and over again. In fact, we have a template that we have put together in collaboration with government technology. We have a social media policy template that just takes best practices from cities across the country, including Arlington, Texas. And so those are resources that exist. We also have a comment moderation guide that details the approach, the best practice approach that we've seen in the industry with removing content that is problematic. So taking those existing resources, tailoring them to your unique social media presence, and getting it out there, establishing that policy has got to be step number one. And after that, I would strongly encourage you to monitor best practices from the cities and counties in your region and learn from each other.
Yeah, and guys, we've got maybe a couple minutes left. Maybe we're going to try and get a couple more quick comments. So Annette Gonzalez, City of Aventura, asks, the AG of Florida states that Facebook posts are a public record but did not explicitly state Twitter. So the question is, is Twitter post a public record too? It kind of sounds obvious, but sometimes the law isn't always clear. So, Gene, how is Twitter a public record? Do you guys treat it that way? And Anil, what have you found in other states?
We do treat it as public record.
Yeah, I'll echo that. That's how agencies who recognize social media in general as a public record, there's no distinction there between Facebook or Twitter. The same reason that the AG did, it's an astute point that AG only said Facebook in the document they put out, but the exact reasons for why they've highlighted Facebook are the same reasons why a tweet or a message across Twitter would be a public record as well, and that's what we're seeing across the country.
Real good. Real quick, Christy Wyatt wants to reach out to our gentleman there from the city of Buda, Dan Marino. So she's over. She said she'd love to help work with you. You guys can't obviously see those comments, but I thought I'd connect people. Here's another one, too, real quick. And we actually had somebody looking for the page, and they came across the unofficial page. So there is an unofficial page, too, for South Daytona. So this is a question for both of you. If it's unofficial, any requirements on the police department or the city to find those and identify those and retain the information being posted?
That's a good question. I'll have to look and see where our unofficial page is. I was not aware of that.
Morgan, I can help out with that as well.
Absolutely.
That happens a lot with unofficial pages, and particularly when it causes a lot of confusion. It really diminishes the value of your official presence. We've worked with a lot of cities and counties that have struggled to get ownership of that unofficial presence or to shut it down. And I just want to extend a hand. We at ArchiveSocial do have a great contact at Facebook that can resolve that issue right away if you are dealing with a page that the city needs to claim but can't and hasn't been able to. Feel free to use my contact information, reach out to me, and I'll try to connect you with Facebook.
Guys, and those are some great questions, and we're getting a lot of folks, asking, again, for the policies. I think that's been one of the most requested questions. Hey, real quick, two things real quick. Did you get any cyber, and this is one obviously of concern to me, did you get any cyber attacks based upon that? And then how long did this event go, from kind of flash to bang when it started, Gene, and when it finally finished? Did you guys get any cyber attacks, and how long did this event go?
Okay, we did not get any cyber attacks. The event started on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and went through about Tuesday. I believe on Monday she was arrested. I'm thinking back. But so it was a good 4 solid days.
Good. Hey, and Anil, last one for you. Another popular question we get of ArchiveSocial. Actually, one of the people already requested your slides because they want to go over to procurement. So it looks like you got a customer out of this. But how much does ArchiveSocial cost? And what does it take to get it started? Real quick.
Sure. Well, archiving solutions in general start at a few $1,000s a year. If you go to our website, we sell a transparency product, so we're completely transparent about it. You can actually click on the pricing tab and see our price point. We've intentionally priced it under $5,000 annual for the vast majority of cities and counties out there in the United States. So about 80% of our customer base can fit in that plan that we call a standard plan. $5,000 annual, fixed costs. There's no other fees of setup fees or export fees or anything like that. You just set it up. It should be enough for most agencies' social media presence. We do have a lower price point than that, and we can also, of course, go higher than that based on your social media presence. And to set it up, the beautiful thing about this technology, being that it's out in the cloud, it deals with Twitter and Facebook, it's as easy as logging into Facebook itself. And so the vast majority of our customers set up in less than 30 minutes.
Hey, that's beautiful, guys. And I hate to rush this, and I hate to cut this off. I'm telling you, we've got more. This is the most questions I've ever handled on any webinar I've ever done for government technology. So, and I'm sorry, guys, we can't get to everything, but make sure you download the slides. So, look, we're going to have to close it out today. I want to be respectful of our time, but first of all, what I want to do is I want to thank, first of all, Gene. Great job, Gene. You really opened up a lot of eyes. Anil, obviously, you've been a great partner here. We appreciate you guys helping us out. And, of course, ArchiveSocial is a big sponsor of this. Guys, don't forget, look in that link for the Golden Post Awards. The entries are due March 1st, so you got to get on this. Make sure that your agency gets recognized. We want to make sure that you guys fill out the survey at the end of this. Look for the download the PDF and the webinar resources. If not, we'll send you out the link for everything. Share this with your friends. Guys, I got to tell you what a great webinar we did today. Lots of questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them, but you guys see this is such an important topic. So if you want to get your questions answered, make sure you join us on the next government technology webinar. So everybody have a great and safe afternoon, and watch out for duct tape. It gets you in lots of trouble. Guys, have a great day.
Thank you.